What is up, everybody? We are continuing our series here at the Debbie Rao YouTube, and we're talking the top 25 teams out there in college football. We've worked our way through. If you haven't watched all of them, go check them out. Even if you're not a fan of Texas A&M or whatever, we put a lot of time and effort in these, and we're working our way through the top 25, and now we are here finally to Kansas State, which is pretty high here. Christian was taking some shots earlier. Why is Kansas State so high? Let him make sure you hear it, fans out there. We're going to be going through their 2024 preview, recruits, depth charts, what we like from them on the defensive side, the offensive side, going over their schedule. Do we like their 9.5 win total? All of the above. But we got to talk a little bit about last year's team. What you saw, there's Avery Johnson. Everybody knows I love Avery Johnson. I'm a big fan of him. He played in 8 games last year. Their starting quarterback, though, is Will Howard, who is now at Ohio State. He had 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, 10 interceptions last year. They finished 9-4 when you're looking at their overall ranking there. They lost to Missouri, which was a very, very tough Missouri squad. Oklahoma State they lost to. They lost to Texas and Iowa State. And the Iowa State game is probably the only one that was like, that they probably should have got that one. The other ones, you could see those losses. And then, when they went to the Pop-Tarts Bowl and they beat North Carolina State out there, and Avery Johnson had a great game. He won the MVP of the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And that's really where you're thinking of like, hey, could this be the year that you have that quarterback, the highly touted guy coming in and really elevate this offense? They did have to. They're going to have to replace Colin Klein, which they had to go because he went to Texas A&M. If you watch that video, we talked about that. Connor Riley is there. He was the offensive line coach. And then they have the former Texas Tech, Utah State head coach, Matt Wells, out there now. And when you look at their offense, it's hard to – I'm going to go through some of the numbers. But again, with Avery Johnson, the quarterback, it's a kind of a different offense. But points per game last year, they ranked number 9 at 36.4 points per game. Yards per game, they ranked 25th at 433 yards per game. Third down conversion, they were 11th in the nation. They did a really good job of continuing drives and making drives stick. From a rushing standpoint, when we talk about him, DJ Giddens, which we'll get into, rushes per game, they were 13th. Rushing yards per game, they were 11th. They averaged 202 rushing yards per game. And that number might be going up this year with Avery Johnson at quarterback. From a passing standpoint, they did struggle. Even Howard struggled there. When you look at yards per pass, he was 73rd. Passes per game, 54th in the nation. And in passing yards per game, they're 58th. So from that perspective, they did struggle through the air. Now, they did bring in some transfers that we'll get into. We're going to talk about kind of that. They kind of revamped this offense. And I do know, just based on, I did a big profile on our Substack on Avery Johnson, I do know that they are looking to push the ball down the field. Chris Kleiman, the head coach there, has talked about pushing the ball more down and being more explosive. So that is something to note about this offense.
Yeah, this is going to be a very different style of offense, I think, than what they got with Will Howard. He was a safer, take care of the ball type of quarterback. But I do think it starts with the rushing attack. I think between DJ Giddens, new transfer Dylan Edwards, which we'll talk about here in a second, and Avery Johnson having that skill set that Will Howard really didn't. He was a fine athlete, but nothing even close to what Avery Johnson is. You're looking at what could be the most dynamic rushing offense in this conference. Now, I do want to say, I think Avery Johnson is what sets the bar for this offense. I think Dante Cephas coming in, I think they will be able to stretch the field a little bit vertically. Keegan Johnson's been good for them. Jace Brown as well. This offensive line lost Cooper Beebe, but they're able to kind of plug and play. This offensive line, I think, overperformed last year, or at least performed up to expectation. I think that they can do it again. They've got a lot of returners on that side of things, and you hope that the added dynamic, it's a very interesting split, because I think Giddens is you give the ball to him, he can take up the really tough carries. But then Dylan Edwards, what we saw from him at Colorado last year, is you throw him the ball in space and he can take any play to the house. So that's an interesting little duo that they've got going, and I think it brings a different dynamic from what they had last year. But everything starts and ends with Avery Johnson, as it does with most teams with the quarterback. I am a pretty big believer in Avery Johnson, which is why we'll get into the over-under and everything as we go through this. But I want to believe in Avery Johnson. I just don't know that it necessarily will translate to wins. I think it's going to translate to points, but we'll talk about the other side of the ball too.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about losses. Probably the biggest one, Cooper Beebe. I think that's the big one there. Hayden Gilliman as well. When we were talking about losses from that offensive line. Will Howard, Do I want to call him he's a notable loss, but I do think having Avery Johnson back there, it's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to give it to this next guy here. And Ben Sinnott, I mean, you had him as tight end too, heading into the pre-draft process, but pre-combine process. You loved him. He is, when you're looking at this wide receiver room, tight end room, that is a loss because he was not only just a good pass catcher, inline blocking tight end. He did that pretty well as well. But these are the big four losses that they had going in from last season.
Yeah, and they really didn't have any other tight end with any notable production last year. It was the Ben Sinnott show.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that they're going to have a guy as versatile as Ben Sinnott on this offense, but I do think that they'll be able to get, if you bring in a wide receiver, I think you can at least get the pass catching production when you combine it with the fact that Avery Johnson will run the ball a little bit more. I did want to mention, there's a reason Will Howard transferred. The Kansas State team said Avery Johnson is the guy. It's time for him, and so maybe it's time that we move on. I think Will Howard kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, "Wow, that kid's good. I'm going to go play for Ohio State." That is notable in the fact that he didn't stick around and lose the job. But I think he would have lost the job either way. I'm pretty sure he would have been the backup had he stayed. So not really
Yeah.
notable from a loss perspective, I guess.
Music to my ears that Ohio State's going to be starting a backup quarterback this year. All right, let's jump over to the 2024 recruits. Again, number 58 overall recruiting class. These Big 12 schools are pretty much all the same. They recruit, they develop, and that's kind of how they do. And they really focus on, that interior offensive line, those type of things there. And when you're looking at it and you're kind of just going through it, Gus Hawkins is the big one, right? That was the big get there. Number 24 ranked interior offensive lineman, 6'6", 280. Very, very good. Trey Davis, number 43rd wide receiver out of there, Texas. 6 foot 170. Caden Massey as well. So when you're looking at that guy, offensive tackle, 6'8", 280. They don't grow them small out there in Kansas, baby. Like they grow them pretty big there. Number 28th offensive tackle out there. And you kind of go through it. Very good, fill pieces in there. Noticeable Demps out there, their wide receiver. He's on campus already. He was an early enrollee. So that's just something to know. Devon Rice as well, early enrollee. I like to point those guys out. Kyle Rakers, 6'4", 281 interior offensive lineman. Again, early enrollee, so he's there. So it's kind of interesting kind of how they filled out, but just the solid pieces. I mean, nothing that really stands out like a top 5 guy, but very solid for Kansas State.
Yeah, Trey Davis is interesting. He had over 1,200 yards and 20 touchdowns as a senior, but kind of overlooked as far as where he was getting recruited by. Washington State was the only notable program to give him an offer. And so they're kind of hoping they find a diamond in the rough with him. I'm curious to see how that pans out for him, but they took some swings at notable positions. The interior offensive line, Gus Hawkins, I think that's a guy that you're hoping can take over and be the next Cooper Beebe. I know Cooper Beebe's brother is still there as well. So you're kind of hoping to have one of those types of guys from a class, but overall just good. They're going to need to develop, of course, as we've talked about multiple times with all these different teams that kind of have the same recruiting vibes. But that's kind of how it is in college football right now.
You gotta learn. You gotta recruit them and get them, just grow them. That's the hometown growth there. And they did okay on the transfer portal. So when you're looking at the transfer portal and what they brought in, I thought they had some depth pieces, right? 64th overall rank, but guys that are maybe a little underrated. Taquan Roberson from UConn, 5'11", 192 quarterback there, gives them some depth probably at that position. The big two gets to me, Dylan Edwards, running back out of Colorado. He had a little buzz last year. Smaller guy, right? I mean, he was even listed at 155 on 3. Now, I don't know if he's that small, but he is a smaller guy, but can be that kind of, I don't know, that lightning to Giddens, right? Gives him kind of that break a little bit and kind of have that thunder lightning kind of crew there. Dante Cephas is another one that was at Penn State last year. And if you know anything about Penn State's offense, they don't do very well utilizing that talent out there. And he struggled to kind of get on the field, but he does give them a very solid piece on the outside. And I think that's one thing that's interesting there. Easton Kilty and Justin Wolf.
Yeah, the big two in my opinion are Edwards and Cephas. I think they needed to kind of replenish some of that receiving prowess, I think, and
Mhm.
Edwards and Cephas both can do that. Edwards is now, I believe, listed around 170, something like that, but still a small dude. But
Yeah.
like we talked about, with Giddens being that early down carry eater type of back, this is a thunder and lightning type of situation. When Dylan Edwards came out as a recruit, he was compared to Tariq Cohen, and he very much so showed off Tariq Cohen like abilities from his time at Colorado. So if he can be that outlet for Avery Johnson, I think that this offense could take a little bit of a leap forward. Outside of the natural leap forward that comes with having Avery Johnson instead of Will Howard.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% there. And now impact players really, well, it's basically three guys. Avery Johnson, number one. And when I was kind of diving into it, I did a big scouting report on there. You can go check it out. But full threat ability is the big thing. When you think of like what he can do on that field, the playmaking, everything that he can do as a playmaker. He can also he just elevates an offense because if there's mistakes or if there's, he's got to roll out, get outside and rush for it or whatever he needs to do, he can do that. And he's a gunslinger, baby. Like when you watch him play, he is not afraid to push the ball down the field. I actually talked about him. I made a comp, and I'm interested to see what Christian thinks about him. When I wrote him my piece, I said he was like a young Jackson Dart. When Jackson Dart was kind of at USC and kind of developing as that passer, and we've seen Jackson Dart develop into a pretty good passer. I mean, he's up there for the 2025 class now. I think Avery kind of has that. He's got that it factor. There's little things in his game he's got to get better. Mechanics, consistent accuracy, the size for like an NFL perspective. But man, he can play, and I think that really, like we've talked about, kind of runs through him. And then the Giddens and Cephas, those guys. I mean, Giddens is going to be the guy, and he's getting NFL buzz as well.
Yeah, Giddens is, I put him first on this list because I think a lot of people believe that the offense is going to run through Giddens. I think maybe early in the year, that's how they'll approach it, is we're going to make things easy for
Mm-hmm.
Avery Johnson. But I don't necessarily think you have to make things easy for Avery Johnson. I think that with this new offense where you are trying to push the ball downfield, it's just run and gun at that point. And that's something that I think Avery Johnson is comfortable with. So he's the critical piece. I think, like I said, I think this offense can put up points. I think that the problem is going to come on the other side with this
Yeah.
team, but overall, this offense to me is way more exciting than the offense as we were heading into the 2023 season with Will Howard at quarterback.
Yeah. And this might be one of those things too, when you're thinking of like growing pains a little bit, maybe early, maybe kind of how that looks. But I do think from a perspective, they're building something pretty strong there. The other guy I just want to mention, JC Brown's getting a lot of love from coaching staff out there. Slot, he's playing probably in the slot with Cephas being back. He is getting love. So that's just something to know. That, when you're thinking of like, hey, who's they gonna get the ball to? And he was recruited with Avery Johnson. So they got that connection. They've talked about having that connection as well. Now let's talk about defense. So where the question could be here with this team. Last year they were a pretty good squad. I mean, 22.8 points per game is what they gave up at 32 overall in the NCAA. When you're looking at from just a rush defense perspective is where they kind of struggled. Opponent yards per rush, 5.1. That's a big number. 116th ranked in college football last year. That's not great. 76 overall for opponent rushing yards per game given up. Passing wise, though, they were okay pass defense. When you're looking at that, still probably in the top 50 category in terms of that. You're going to get thrown a lot on in the Big 12. That's just one of those things that happens in that conference. So the numbers are going to be skewed a little bit. But really, the big number that kind of stands out to me is that they had a 99th ranked pass sack percentage. So when you think of sack percentage, they didn't get after the quarterback. That's good. That's trouble. That spells trouble in the Big 12, not being able to get out the quarterback. So not the greatest effort from a defensive side. I think that's what you saw in those losses that they had.
Yeah, and their leading sack getter is gone. And
Yeah.
so therein lies the problem that I've been talking about. I just we're gonna need to see some of these other guys, these depth pieces, step up. Cody Stufflebean, I think Brendan Mott has an opportunity here, but these aren't guys that move the needle for me. The secondary is pretty good. I like Jacob Parrish. VJ Payne's really good. Marquez Siegel, I'm probably saying that wrong. I apologize, Kansas State fans, but those are all guys that I'm excited by in that secondary. And if they can fly around, get to the ball, I think that that'll be good. However, when you have that type of situation where they're struggling to get to the pass rusher, the defensive front seven or front six in this case, it's harder for the secondary to get there. So to me, this is if these edge rushers take a step forward, if these linebackers take a step forward, then I could see this being a productive, bend don't break type of defense. But as it currently stands, I haven't really seen a ton from many of these guys to believe that they can even be that this year.
Yeah. And that's the kicker, right? When you're looking at that. I mean, that's the big number that always stood out to me was that sack percentage when you're looking at that. Because their two leading sack getters last year, Khalid Duke had 6, and then Matlock had 4. That was it. I
Mhm.
mean, they really didn't go after that ball. And then when you're looking at kind of the losses there, Kobe Savage is he had 57 tackles last year, 3 interceptions, leadership type kind of area there. Khalid Duke, like I just mentioned, he's the big sack getter there with 6 sacks, and it will lead a third. He did have those 42 tackles, 2 interceptions as well. But they need to just be better, right? Defensively, they just got to kind of make sure those guys develop and do those things like you mentioned, because they just didn't do that, right? And they didn't add. They added some guys in the transfer portal. We'll kind of talk about that, but I don't know if they added enough. I think that's the big question.
Yeah, Will Lee was probably their most complete cornerback that they had as well, and so Khalid Duke's clearly their best edge rusher. So it's an interesting state on the defensive side. I'll say that.
All right, let's jump over to recruits. Not a ton of recruits out there, and no 4-star guys on the defensive side. So, if you're looking for red flags, or if you're looking, and again, stars, I'll get the stars don't matter in the comments, but they do. If you look at blue
They do.
chip and you talk about it, like they're going to matter there. They definitely will have that secondary, with Callan Barter and then Dante Thomas. When you're looking at what they were trying to do there from a safety perspective, not. Again, not a ton to talk about. Gabe McMahon is there. And when you're looking at guys who are actually there early enrollees, Boone Morris is there, linebacker. He's probably their most ready to go, 6'2", 220. But these guys, it's going to be developing. Can they kind of get out in the field this year? There's probably a big question mark there.
Yeah, Malcolm Alcorn Crowder intrigues me a bit. Just a big kid.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I think you're right. Boone Morris is probably the most ready to play. I think Caden McMahon has some upside. But these aren't guys that I think move the needle. We often, when we do these, we talk about, well, these guys won't play because there's depth in front of them. There's not a whole lot of depth in front of these guys, and I still don't know that they can play. And so that's where we'll see how these guys pan out. I hope they do, and I hope a lot of these guys become impact players. But as of right now, I don't see any of these guys making a strong impact in 2024.
Yeah, and then when we look at like transfers, really what you're looking at are guys that, okay, where are they coming from? How do they perform? And can they really make that impact? The 2 highest rated transfer guys they got was Jordan Dunbar from Rice. He's coming over there in terms of that. He started as a 3-star, he transfers as a 3-star. And then Alec Marenko from
Yeah.
Marenko. Yeah, I got it. Hey, don't yell at me. New Mexico out there, linebacker there. Quentin Rice, looking at cornerback position. Again, really kind of going down from BYU. So again, not a bad pickup, but like, what does that look like? Jordan Riley, Travis Bates as well. When you're looking at their transfer in there, Travis Bates, a defensive lineman, in 6'3", 250, could just sure up and do those things. But fine transfers. But when you think of transfer, what we've done for especially for a program ranked pretty high in the top 25 according to The Athletic, these are not transfers we're used to talking about when we're talking about impact players.
No, I do like Marenko. I think that there are signs of a good player on his film from
Yeah.
last year. He had 50, 66 tackles, 50, I think, solo tackles or something like that. Good mop-up duty player, and I think he will have an opportunity. I think Quentin Rice, Jordan Dunbar will have an opportunity as well to play. Jordan Riley is going to be one of those rotational players. They often play multiple safeties, like 3 safety, and kind of throw one of the safeties as their nickel. I'm curious to see if Riley can break into that. But yeah, it's just not a needle moving group of transfers because to these positions that they needed were rich with a ton of really good players. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we've already talked about most of those really good players in the back half of the top 25 here. So I would say they lost all the prizes, but I think these guys can come in and rotate and hopefully be impactful compared to what maybe they rolled out there last year.
Yeah, no, 100%. And when you're looking at impact players that we kind of talked about here, really safety position, right? I mean, that is the big one. Siegel, and when you look at VJ Payne, like they think that they have 2 big all Big 12, like first teamers. That's what the coaching staff has talked about as being those guys. Jacob Parrish as well. They're really high on them. And experience. They said experience matters, and they believe that their two safeties are there, but they need to be more, right? Then this defense, like I mentioned, though, like when we were talking about this defense, they were a very good unit in the Big 12 last year. They were top 5 defense in the Big 12 in terms of points per possession allowed. So like they have done the bend don't break, right? They do that, like the field goals and everything there. But they really gonna have to gel to come together there. But I do know they like their safeties. They think that they can be all Big 12 and possibly NFL guys.
Yeah, and I probably didn't do a good enough job talking about how good these two safeties are. I mentioned that the secondaries where I really like some of these players, but they are going to have to be all first team all Big 12. If this defense is going to be even similar to what it was last year, they're going to need to find sack production. I think maybe some creative pressure looks might be incorporated, and maybe that alleviates the lack of a true dominant defensive end. But yeah, the safeties very good. I like Jacob Parrish a bit as well. I think the safeties have even NFL upside. So you're kind of hoping that they can fly around the field and make things happen, create turnovers, cause chaos, things like that. And if they can do that, then maybe I'll look like a fool in a couple months.
Really the key comes down to this defense. If you go through the numbers the first 4 weeks, we're going to go to the schedule. Did they create sack opportunities, and did they go get sacks? And if they don't, I have a feeling that you're not going to like the record. I think it's that simple on that defensive side. And when you look at the schedule, it's tough. I mean, they got over under at 9.5, and then that's a big number compared to like a lot of the teams that are out there that we've kind of talked about. You have UT Martin at Tulane. At Tulane's not a gimme. That's not a gimme game at Tulane there. That's a tough place to play versus Arizona. So, that's a good get to get at home. At BYU versus Oklahoma State. So when you look at their schedule and you're going through it, Colorado, West Virginia, Kansas, Houston, Arizona State, Cincinnati, Iowa State. The nice thing for them is their games are at home. Versus Arizona, versus Oklahoma State, versus Kansas. Those 3 games, which I think are their tougher games, they are at home. That helps this team because when you're thinking of like just that lack of maybe experience, a little bit of the quarterback position or whatever, but that game 3 loom large. And even Tulane, that could be like one of those look-ahead games. Oh, we got Arizona coming. We need to go make a statement there. Oh, wait, at Tulane, forgot about this team here. And then they can get tripped up a little bit. So tougher schedule and over under 9.5. That's lofty expectations for this program.
Yeah, and I think at Houston is a fairly tough game. I think Houston's going to be better than people project. At Iowa State is a tough game. That's a team that I'm actually super high on. I think maybe could push for the top 25 when things are all said and done at the end of the year. But then Kansas, I think at Colorado, while I'm down on Colorado, that's going to be a tough game because Colorado, at the very least, should be able to put up some points. Maybe 6 weeks into the season, we'll see. Maybe not. But yeah, it's just really tough for me to get to 10 wins for this team. So I have to hit the under here. I do see a 3 losses. I think this is probably a 9-win team, and I think Kansas State fans largely would be fairly happy with that. And it's especially in Avery Johnson's first year as a starter. If you can win 9 games, you can kind of set yourself up to be a transfer destination to play with Avery Johnson. Then I think we're cooking. And I think maybe 2025 is that year that they can get to 10, get to probably not 11, but maybe they can get to 10 and be looking at a college football playoff berth. But I just don't think this is the year.
Yeah, I love Avery Johnson, Kansas State fans. So I don't want you to. I wrote a freaking huge profile on him. I love him. This is not the year to get them over 9.5. I just don't see it. I'm going to go under. I think 8 is a perfectly, fine season for them. I think 8 is fine with what they're at right now. And I do think that they can take that next step. But yeah, I'm at 8. And again, I think they're going to cannibalize each other in the Big 12. We've been going through all these teams. It's one of those things where I think that, they are probably going to lose 3 games. Then they're going to lose 2 games. You're like, oh, okay, I can see them losing that. Then they're going to lose that 1 game on the road somewhere. And you're like, what the heck happened there? Like the Iowa State at the end of the year. I think Iowa State's going to be tougher than people think. That's going to be a tough game. Like those type of games are where what is tough in the Big 12. So for me, I'm going under. So we'll see. What do you think, Kansas State fans, in the comments? Like, where are you going there? And just overall, I think, this is a big transition year for Kansas State and new offensive coordinator now. Are they going to actually push the ball down the field? How does the recruiting hold up? What does that look like with this new look kind of college football? Can they recruit at a high enough level to make the playoff, right? When you're thinking of like, hey, maybe they can compete for it. Because really, I feel like Big 12 team, if you want to make it in the championship or go to the playoff, you got to win the Big 12 championship. So really what coaches got to be looking at is how can I win the Big 12 championship? What can I do to get ahead of some of these teams? And that really comes from that quarterback position. If they actually did hit on Avery Johnson, and next year, there's teams rolling. Like that's a Kansas State team that, especially with how old, top heavy a lot of those top heavy teams are in the Big 12. Utah, top heavy, old. Oklahoma State, very old. We've kind of talked about that. Even Kansas, like Kansas State might just be a year away from really competing for that Big 12 championship. And then next year, they could be the favorites next year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so, and I don't think that the recruiting is going to speak to that, but I do think that the portal is going to be critical to that, path. I think we've seen the portal be critical for teams. Now, it doesn't always pan out. We saw Colorado flip their roster twice already, and that just doesn't seem like it's going to work out. Maybe it will this year, but I think when you talk about filling holes, filling your weaknesses, and kind of going at it that way. When you have a young quarterback, it's a lot easier to do. The same way in any sport, when you have talented players, other talented players want to play with the talented players. So I think the goal for this year should be become a transfer destination for that push in 2025. I think 8 to 9 wins is a really, really solid year. I can't get behind the number 16 ranking. Shout out to the Athletic for the ranking, but I'm a little bit down on them, I guess, compared to the industry out here.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, the Kansas State fans, let us know what you think. Would you be happy with 8 or 9 wins? Do you think you can overperform that 9.5 and get up to 10 or 11 and compete? Let us know what you think. I think it really comes out of that defensive side for me, where I'm hesitant to say they can get the over just because of the pieces and that lack of pressure that they can get on the quarterback, especially in this conference. So let us know what you think. Hit that like and subscribe button. We'll check you in the next video.